ladies, you like working, don't you? Of course you like working. Get back to the office. Because that's basically what the entire messaging of society is. And every time that you make a TikTok saying, hang on a second, I didn't sign up to be a wage slave for the rest of my life while my ovaries start drying up and I never get to see the few children I get to have, you can thank your feminist betters and priors who made this the world possible for you. But before we begin, if you want to support us, go over to lowsis.com, sign up, watch the Battle of Blenheim, which is an absolutely epic series of events and in no way connected to what we're talking about now. It's just a really good palate cleanser, some greatest English heroes in all of human history. English history, which is human history. It's the only bit of human history that's worth watching. Anyway, go watch that. And so we'll begin, if we could. This is, no, next one. We'll begin with this. So I saw this going around, and I feel bad for her. Actually, I feel bad for this young lady. Let's watch.
Whoever fought for women to get jobs. Why? Why did we do that? I am so tired. I want to just put my feet up. Like, I am... Oh my God.
So, it's very performative.
Yeah.
Well, everything on TikTok is.
Yeah.
It's very hard to work out what's real.
And I'm not even sure if that's real or not.
No, but there are lots of people who this resonated with.
Yeah.
Because I think there are lots of young women who are...
I can tell you exactly why it did too, because there is a mountain of evidence why this resonated. Basically, every time you have anything that looks like feminism, and the modern variety is only one example of this, it's existed throughout. Any society that produces a percentage of women with reasonably high status going back to antiquity, you will see this pattern of behaviour. Some women don't enjoy parenting, they don't enjoy children, they don't find it fun, and they're not necessarily homosexual. I mean, obviously you expect that with people who...
Kind of inevitable with lesbians.
It's kind of part of being a lesbian. It's also in the opposite direction, kind of part of being a gay male. Okay, you get this cognitive crossover with homosexuals. We're 1% to 3% of the population, so you're not going to see this elsewhere. So you get a minority of straight men who absolutely do not want to be dads. Mm-hmm. They want to be playboys, and they'll try and get away with it if they can.
Yep.
And you will get a minority of straight women who do not want to be mums. They are career focused, and if they're of high intellect combined with disagreeableness, so we're talking Jordan Peterson's the big five here. So you combine high intellect with disagreeableness, you get a desire to be a high achiever in the workplace.
And what percentage of women are those characteristics found in conjunction?
The traditional argument that I have seen made by statisticians is that you get it very strongly in about 10% and weakly in about 20%. So you're 20% of the women who might want one or two children, but still are largely career focused. Sure. That is nowhere near the majority of women. No. But the thing is, your feminist movements inevitably are led by women of that type and this is the other thing, because it's quite depressing to understand, because of female intersexual competition, straight women struggle with solidarity. You tend to finish up needing, in these all female-dominated groups, a reasonably disproportionate percentage of lesbians in there, because they can do the male-style traditional male-style trade union type solidarity, which is why you get so many lesbians prominent in feminism, because they need the blokey ones to run it, basically, without it exploding.
But I've seen... I mean, this video was just the most recent.
Most women are like her.
Yeah,
they don't want a job.
I could have gone back and found probably half a dozen other videos of, reasonably attractive young women who are just like, I don't want to work. I want to be a housewife. I want to have kids. I want to just, be a domestic goddess. I want to do nice things. And for that, they can literally thank the suffragettes and the feminist movement. This is just from the Wikipedia page, which I just think is the most hilarious line I've ever read in my entire life, and tells you everything you need to know about democracy, right? More American women organized against their own right to vote than in favor of it, until 1916, when, of course, they were given the vote. Anti-suffragism was associated with domestic feminism, the belief that women had the right to complete freedom within the home. in the United
No,
States.
1916 is not when they got the vote. Americans were very late because feminism obviously there must have been a numbers flip in 1916 because the 19th Amendment went through in, I think, 1919 or 1920. You will have Americans who will say so. And one of the reasons why there were problems for feminism, this is very specific American history, is because they were associated with prohibition. And it was already becoming clear as the 20s progressed and the period of prohibition. It was already one of the reasons why feminism in the United States has historically, particularly amongst Black people, had a bad reputation, is because it was associated with prohibition, because white women voted dry, and where they had the franchise, which was mainly in the northern states, Black men and immigrants voted wet. So that's why you had this sort of long period of conflict in the United States over the status of feminism and the status of women. It's why American feminism has achieved nothing. Basically, abortion rights came from the court in America, whereas over here it was actual proper agitation because women actually achieved things here on their own behalf as a group.
It depends what you consider an achievement. I mean, if ruining the lives of Generation Z women is anything, then they've achieved quite a lot.
Well, I'm speaking in positive terms here.
But the point is, women have not actually overwhelmingly been on the side of women's suffrage and women in the workplace and feminism and female empowerment. Actually, most women kind of haven't. No. And they don't get to have a say. Going back to the article, right? In fact, they have an article about this that is essentially a woman saying, yeah, you might be tired, get back to work. The owner of your company's yacht is not going to pay for itself. We need you in those cages, right?
During 2020, when working from home became a big deal, there is a TV psychiatrist who is quite popular usually in her presentation. Her name is Emma Kenny. And she made, you know who I mean, and she made a point once on one of her shows, I think it was like Good Morning Britain or, the kind of things that she goes on. She tries to keep it very light and bright. She said, if you are a woman with a job and a young child, there is no way you can get adequate sleep.
Yes.
The only way someone working can get adequate sleep, a woman, is either you can have the commute and no child and you'll get adequate sleep because you just sleep through the night and you just have to get up early and that's fine. Or you can have the child but no job and you will get adequate sleep. You cannot do both. It's actually impossible in terms of the way people's sleep patterns are. She's a shrink, so she knows this kind of thing.
It's totally true. And I can see it firsthand.
Yeah. It's just not possible to do. And she maintained this is why support for lockdown and working from home was so intense among so many mothers of young children, because what they were doing during the course of 2020 and a significant part of 2021 was catching up on an enormous sleep debt.
I mean,
and I have never seen anything to contradict that claim, and I'm reasonably confident. No. I mean, she's a careful researcher.
Yeah. I mean, my wife has a 2.5-year-old and a 5-month-old at home, and she has to have naps in the afternoon. She just doesn't have but she's the one who gets up in the night to deal with them when they're upset or need bottles or whatever it is, right? But it's just, you are absolutely right. There is just not enough sleep for a young mother, a new mother.
You can do one or the other, but you can't do both at the same time.
But anyway, let's sleep when the baby sleeps. That's when you get a nap.
But the baby sleeps when it wants. And anyway, so I find this article fascinating, and I thought we'd go through it, right? Because it's got a lot of the sort of feminist fictions in it, but it's also just young women, just get back in line. We need you on the plantation. If you think that sitting at home while your husband goes out to work and you having a nice house and having some pets and having some babies sounds like fun, you're part of the problem, right? That's what this article is. They say, it's no secret that many of us would dream of earning a full-time salary without having to complete a strenuous day of work for 8 hours, 5 days a week. That's literally what being a housewife is. That's literally what that is, right? Even if most of us were not required to work and did not make much money that we do at our jobs, it would be nice to be able to kick our feet up and relax more often than we can imagine in current times. One woman believes, and that's the woman in the clip, that this lifestyle was once right at her fingertips before it was stripped away by women's rights activists in the 1900s. She reminds us that there is once a time when women were not allowed to work outside of their households, and she admits that she is more suited for that life than the one she's currently living in. Well, that's interesting, because it's also not true, right? I can scroll down on here We can actually see what the labour force participation of women was. Now, in 1940, say 5, it was about 33%, which isn't massive.
And they would be the poor women. Because poor women have always had to work.
You've got to be careful with 1945 as well, because you had significant labour market recruitment throughout the developed world, and not just in Western countries. I mean, the Soviets and the Nazis were doing it as well, even though it was against Nazi policy, because they had the whole...
This was specifically in the United States.
But so you get that because of the war.
Yeah. But even then, after the war, you can see that women, of course, were in the labour market, and women have always been needed to work because, like you said, people aren't rich. And so they have always needed to work. So it's not like, I love the idea that they think there was some sort of law or statute that prevented women from working. I mean, you're a legal expert. What year did that come in?
What you would get historically, this is always a bit more complex, is that women would be denied access to the professions. And this is something that has existed for a long time. Once again, in societies going back to antiquity, where you had societies where some women, was always only some, had high status. For example, you had female advocates in pagan Rome. You even have a word in Latin for a barrister, advocata. In modern Italian, there wasn't until relatively recently a word for female advocate. In Romance languages, because they're gendered, in order to show an improvement in status for a woman is to give them a feminine form of the word. So women would be l'avvocato. So they would be referred to in using the male form, which is typically ending with a 0, although with an O, not always. Sure. So one of the things, for example, that you when you know that politics or government has changed, one of the things, for example, that one of the Christian emperors, Theodosius, did was took from female advocates the ability to have rights of appearance.
That was going back a little further than I was expecting.
But no, you had this all through the 18th and 19th century. Is you had denial of entrance to the professions. The one historically that actually mattered was law. Medicine didn't matter, and the reason it didn't matter is because doctors used to kill more people than they were butchers. But lawyers, I mean, there are two great ways of discovering the truth about something: the scientific method, which is relatively new, or the laws of evidence, which evolved in 2 civilizations and are a couple of thousand years old. So denial of entrance to the professions, once again, for that group of 10 to 20% of women of high intellect and disagreeableness, really chase. Sure, it really grates on them. So they're the ones that ran these campaigns. So that's why you can often document very, very easily the first female barrister, the first female solicitor. That is why when they talk about denial of access to the labour market, they're not talking about being a washerwoman or a cook or that kind of thing. They're talking about being a barrister.
The labour market.
Yes.
So it was a status job.
It's a status jobs, which is why we've got this weird situation where there's a class of clever people of both sexes who effectively rule over us, the sort of new elite. And they come from the same social class as me. I have to be completely frank about this, best to be honest. But then underneath, the labour market is completely segregated into classic working class jobs, mostly male, pink collar and blue collar jobs that are also segregated once again by sex. You know, the only unsegregated part of the labour market is the top 20% of it.
But what the problem I have is that you're, as Nick points out, speaking about very elite jobs that are at the top of society. I'm guessing that woman isn't doing one of those.
No.
And this is what they're referring to here is women were just not allowed to work. Women were not allowed to work outside of their households. Nonsense. There's never been time. There's never been a law, and it's never been possible because, as Nick said, people are poor. Like you said, they need to be washerwomen. They need to be whatever.
Even in modern times, okay, she may not be working as a cleaner or a nurse assistant or something.
She's working in an email.
What if she's working in a call centre?
Yeah,
I cannot imagine. And I've had a friend go through this when he had a loss in status and had to work in a call centre for Newspol in Australia, which is really the Aussie equivalent of YouGov. It is the most soul-destroying job, and it is very poorly paid.
Yeah, I worked in tech support. It's insanely boring. You know, why any woman would choose that over being a housewife is beyond me.
Because of the continuous propaganda that's been pumped to them over decades. And
it's not just propaganda, it's pressure as well. Rising house prices. Decline in salaries. So you finish up, and I don't mean overall, but salaries are relative to the amount of money that you need to buy a house. So you've got the classic not enough housing, decline in salaries relative, you need multiples and multiples of your salary to buy a house. The idea that a bank can take into account both male and female incomes, that was when people apply for a mortgage, that was something that Tony Blair introduced. Before Blair, it was you could only choose one of the two salaries, and it was nearly always the male, not always, but you could only choose the higher of the two salaries. And so what you finish up with now is you need two people to buy a house, and you actually two people with a job isn't enough. You need two people with good jobs.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to the article, so we're told a lie that women weren't allowed to work outside their homes, which is not true. And then they say, working full time is undoubtedly difficult and draining at times. The rights women have gained in the process are worth it. Sacrifice for us. We, the elite class, who have decided that your happiness was the worthy sacrifice to make so we could get the job being a barrister or whatever it was that my forebears wanted, that I have access to.
Which also means that what you finish up with is the posh woman paying for a poor woman
for
effectively to raise her children.
Which is as it's always been.
That is why the joke done by Matt the cartoonist in the Tory graph during the Brexit debates in 2019, where a posh couple and the woman says to her husband, "Oh, we sent our Romanian nanny on the People's Vote March." That is why that joke was funny, because it was true.
But you can see here the exploitative nature of it. You've got young, normal women who are like, look, I actually just wanted like the dream of, being a housewife in a picket fence house and, sending my kids off to school and then baking all day or something like that. And this one was like, no. The rights women have gained, quote unquote, are worth it. So now you get back in the wage cage and you sit there data entering or whatever it is you're doing that's exhausting you and making you really despondent and depressed. So just literally, you are the inferior class to these women. That's what is being
It's
said.
a combination of a belief, class distinction, always important in Britain. The other one is mistaking your own preferences for everybody else's preferences. That's the other one, which is a different psychological phenomenon.
We're watching a distinct conflict of this. Young women be like, this is not my preference to be the wage earner. And she's like, yeah, but my rights to be a wage earner is more important than that. So you can just suck it up.
And what these women need to understand is feminism really is a trade union for other feminists.
Yeah.
But it's a trade union for posh women.
Yeah.
Who are feminist. That's what feminists are, is the woman
the credentialed
you
class.
described.
Yeah.
The average woman on the street never identifies themselves as a feminist.
Well, the big Servation poll, Fawcett Society got an embarrassing result when they got Servation, who are famously the best polling company in Britain, in 2016 when you don't define feminists as legal equality between men and women. As soon as you define that, you get something like 90% agree, but even most Muslims agree with it.
Yeah.
It's incredible. But if you don't define it and just allow people to form their own image based on it, I think Servation found 7% of men and 9% of women would voluntarily call themselves
on average
feminist.
8% of the population.
8% of the population. Everybody else just takes one look at that and says, you're all bonkers.
Yeah, well, the 90% of women are like, but I don't hate men.
Yeah.
That's the answer they give. But anyway, they say it's important to acknowledge that women were once forbidden from having the financial independence that we do now. To which I have to laugh, because now we're going to talk about women's financial independence. So let's talk about how much taxes women pay. Shall we? I mean, you're obviously not in this group. Right? You are obviously a net taxpayer. Do you think women overall are net taxpayers?
We are such net taxpayers, my partner and I. You know, the bank that debanked Nigel Farage, the same week that they debanked Nigel Farage, my partner got an email asking, we have some investments, okay, but not enough for them to be for us to have a dedicated banker with them. Would you like to bank with us? And we do this based on your net worth and so on and so forth. And basically this led to an explosive scenes from my partner along the lines of, right, so you've been checking my social media activity and getting on property data surveys to find out what we own, both individually and jointly, and have decided that you're going to offer us banking facilities after debanking Nigel Farage. And among other things, the email involved, You do know I vote. You do know we both voted for Brexit, don't you?
So you being a statistical outlier, I think, is the thing to take away from this, because I went through the charts that the government give you of just total amount of tax paid by men and women. So the overall amount is £196 billion, out of which women paid 56.7 billion, men paying 139 billion. Which means that men are responsible for 70% of all tax paid in this country.
That does not surprise me at all.
No.
In fact, I'm surprised that it's as even as 70-30. I thought it might have been 80-20. I think in the United States, it's something like 80-20.
It probably is. But the point is, women are only paying 30% of the tax. And you think, okay, fine. I mean, if we were living in some sort of Lockean state that had minimal commitments, then perhaps that wouldn't be a problem, because women would have financial independence. They'd have their own money, they'd be working, blah, 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 except no, because of course we have benefits in this country. We have lots and lots of benefits. So last year, the UK government paid £231 billion in benefits. Where do you think that's going? Exactly. We know that according to the UK government, women made up 56% of people on universal credit and claimed, basically saying they claimed 56% of the benefits. And
well, universal credit's not a good statistic. Housing benefits the better one to look at in terms of a big hole in the finances.
It would be, but even by this metric, women as a class are £72 billion in debt every year. They do not pay in any way. They're not even like halfway. They are massive deficits in the public purse. So I don't want to talk about financial independence. You aren't financially independent. You're massively dependent on men paying taxes. Let's make sure.
And also the phenomenon, and this is a somewhat crude Americanism. It's not a swear word, but it is quite crude. They talk about, with the breakdown of the contemporary family, instead of marrying a man, women
marry the state.
Yes.
Yeah, so you've heard it as well.
Yes.
I can't remember which American said it, but it is a very witty line.
And it's totally true. And we have the numbers. As you said, it's probably worse than I can summon here. But this was all I could find.
It also can be too, because Britain is a different country from the US and has different labour market patterns and different productivity patterns and that kind of thing.
But I'm specifically speaking to the British experience, where men are literally getting into debt. I mean, women need to more than double the amount of taxes they pay to cover the benefits they receive, at least. But it's probably worse. Anyway, going back. So women's rights advocates had to continuously fight for equality. You mean a special privilege, given that just a little over a century earlier, married women had been given granted the right to own property in their own name. To many, they were considered property themselves under the ownership of their fathers and husbands. Yeah, I wonder if it's something to do with the debt. Even in today's workforce, women still earn significantly less than men due to the wage gap.
The wage gap exists because it's a motherhood gap. As soon as you control the childbirth...
Everyone knows, right? Everyone knows. But look at the frame.
Sorry, I just hate statistical fails. I hate it.
Everyone knows, right? But look at the way that's framed. Women earn significantly less than men due to the wage gap. No, the wage gap is what you're using to describe the disparity between men and women. There must be some prior cause before that, before you can even describe such a thing as a wage gap. This is how bad this person's thinking is. Like the wage gap, as if that's a magic word that explains this natural thing.
I was taught labour market economics by a socialist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But he was an honest socialist.
Oh, really?
And they do exist.
Yeah, I was going to say a few and far between.
And when we were taught the stuff, and he refused to call it the gender wage gap. He thought gender was a load of cobblers, and not being, he wasn't a TERF. This is years before TERFs. This is back in the 90s. It was just, it's to do with sex and it's to do with women having children. And we just exhaustively went through, in this case, the Australian Bureau of Statistics data on point. And it is the most obvious thing in labour market economics. It is the most difficult to ignore. It is also the easiest to understand if you're one of those kids who didn't do brilliantly at your applied maths A level. You know, if you only got a C.
I only got a C. I was never into maths though. But anyway, they carry on saying, look, basically the problem is women feel overwhelmed by balancing their jobs and taking care of their families. Obviously they would. 54% of heterosexual married households where both parents work full-time report that it's mostly the mother that manages the household and children's schedules, as per Pew. Yes, the husband's out earning the majority of the money and paying the majority of the taxes, as we've just covered. This could be a major factor contributing to burnout in so many women employees in today's workforce. That's correct. So one thing to do would be for them to not be in the workforce. That would be one solution.
It would be, as I discussed with Louise Perry on this point, because she talks quite a lot about it, it would involve, there are policies you could introduce to deal with aspects of this, like transfer between spouses of the personal allowance or income splitting, which used to be an old policy that exists in Australia, where you split the higher income in, usually the male, not always, into two, and you have to do state mandated structures to set up a separate bank account for the woman, where basically he's pay for housework, and then she leaves the workforce. That's known as income splitting. There are various policies you can introduce to help ameliorate this problem that would encourage family formation and would also encourage women to be homemakers and probably happier. But you would have to get Treasury. You have to get it past Treasury, which has built this entire structure based on mass labour market participation, to the point where, for example, education in the NHS, if you pull just 20% of the female labour force out of both schools and the NHS, so even if only a fifth of women took up one of these opportunities, if you set your tax system up in that way, you would collapse both. Yeah, we've made the entire system. This is an enormously complex policy problem. And what I'm repeating to you here is basically what I told Louise Perry, because she's identified it. And like most of the post-liberals, she's not strong on policy. None of them are. No. Whereas I'm coming fairly typically out of the policy wonk classical liberal background, which is policy, cost it all. We have created a monster. Yes. And I'm good at policy development, and I don't know how you fix it, because the howls from the Treasury, my God.
Well, that's because, like you say, you've literally created a monster that's conscripted young women and has conscripted generations yet to be born into paying for itself rather than them having their own life.
It's actually a Ponzi scheme. The whole of the state pension is a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
Current contributions are funding current entitlements. It's a literal Ponzi scheme.
And this is why everyone complains, Maloney has just opened the borders to 400,000 new immigrants. Yeah, because she got to the top of the Ponzi scheme and was like, oh God, I can't let this collapse. If I let this collapse, then I'm the one holding the bag. I'm the one who's allowed grandma to starve. I'm the one. And so they have to keep going. And so immigration will never end because the boomers want their pensions.
It's taken 100 years to get to this state.
Yeah.
That is true.
To change
that's a fair,
it will take another 100 years.
You're taking the long view. I'm just sitting there and
do it short. It'd have to take.
It can't be done without the system collapsing, basically. So essentially, at some point, we're going to have to.
You're going to have. It may happen in the US first, although it depends, because there's still the global reserve currency. But the United States social security system may completely collapse. You keep seeing predictions of this amongst sort of libertarianish economics, but it's the classic case of economists have predicted the last 257 of three recessions. That they're just useless at forecasting. But the thing is, eventually, and this is the line from Steve Davies at the Institute of Economic Affairs, is that eventually the merry-go-round will stop.
Yes.
Has to.
It has to.
Yes. And this is what this person is trying to defend in doing all of this. But anyway, they say that basically men can start picking up the slack by helping at home. It's like, yeah, but you've been saying that for decades and that's not happened, because it's just not natural to men to do that, frankly. This is true. And so you have to be a wage slave to make sure that the commitments that have been made don't go unfulfilled.